Have you told your friends that you see ghosts?
Oh, absolutely not.
Gina Rodriguez returns in Not Dead Yet.
I'm back, baby.
Who is that?
Oh, she's the obituary writer.
And Brad Garrett joins the brilliant ensemble cast.
Titan, Maverick, Titan of all Mavericks. These are all words used to describe me.
Not Dead Yet. Season premiere. Tonight, 8:30, 7:30 Central on ABC. And stream on Hulu.
It's the Happy Families podcast. It's the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now.
Before we began this podcast, I asked you to make a list of all the things that you need to do every day because there is so much to do. You don't know where this is going yet, but can you read out what's on your list?
Well, it starts with a reset of the house.
Yeah.
Once the kids leave.
Right, which they don't leave anymore because we're homeschooling. So how's that
Making
reset
beds,
going?
Putting everything back in its place so I can feel like there's some order in my home.
Yeah.
But there's all the washing, the folding, the hanging out, the ironing. There's meal prep and the dishes and tidy up that come as a result of that. Breakfast, lunch and dinner. Food, it just never ends. There's taxing kids to and from school, extracurricular activities, then trying to squeeze in all the errands that are required to keep the house functioning. And on top of all of that, I'd like to have a little bit of time for me so I can exercise and do a bit of self-care. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to add to that. You've got to maintain your relationships. Like you actually want to have relationships with people, which means being in touch with friends, whether it's on Messenger or Marco Polo or regardless of or actually having an in-person conversation and catch up with somebody. You didn't mention the yard or the car.
Well, and then there's service. Service plays a really big part in our lives.
Yep.
And that takes up a significant amount of time.
Oh, and you still haven't mentioned there's the need to earn an income. There's a need to sleep. Nobody mentioned sleep. And we need to have time with our kids because remember, we love them and we want to spend time with our children. That's why we had them. So the expansive list of things that need to be done in a day is just enormous. Today, our conversation is about creating margin because I think one of the most commonly asked questions that I get from people is, how am I supposed to do it all and still be a good parent? Like, how do I hold this together when the list of things to do is just impossible to get through?
I think the problem is the question. We're not actually supposed to do it all.
Well, wouldn't it be nice if we could? But that's it, isn't it? Like we've got this thing in our head.
We actually can't do it all.
Yeah. I've always had the motto, we should bite off more than we can chew and then make it up as we go along. But what I'm finding over time is that, well, you get a lot more done than you would otherwise with a motto like that. But it sure does wear you out. It can be absolutely exhausting. And so in today's conversation, we want to share with you 4 tips that are going to make all the difference when it comes to creating margin in an overscheduled, over-busy life. Some time ago, I shared on the podcast the analogy of the washing machine. For those who missed it, when you were pregnant with one of our first children, I decided to be really helpful around the house and do all the clothes washing. So I went and collected all of the darks and all of the whites and all of the pinks because we had daughters and there was so much pink clothing. And decided that the darks load was the biggest one, so I was going to load that in the machine and wash that first. And once it had finished, I pulled the clothing out and it was dirtier than it had been when I put it in there. And when I called out to you after browsing the Harvey Norman catalogue to see if we should buy a new washing machine, you commented that I'd put about 3 loads worth of washing in one load. And when you put too much in, you get a lousy result.
Not only do you get a lousy result, but that washing machine's not going to last very long if you keep doing that time and time again.
But it doesn't just happen with washing machines. It happens with fridges. You overstack the fridge doesn't keep the food cold. It works with when I'm mowing the lawn. If I don't stop and empty the catcher, all of a sudden I get a lousy result with the lawn because the catcher can only hold so much grass that I've clipped.
Well, since we're going with thinny analogies, if I put too much food in my belly, everything stops because I can't function. I feel sluggish. I just want to go to sleep and I have a bellyache.
Especially depends on what sort of food you're eating. But that's probably a conversation for another day. I think, though, the main point is when you put too much in, you get a lousy result, whether it's your belly or whether it's the refrigerator or the washing machine or whatever. And our lives and the lives of so many parents that we talk to are just stacked, so full. So 4 ideas that we think can make a difference when you look at the list and think, I can't possibly do it all. Actually, I'm adding a fifth one. We've already kind of touched on it, but the first one, which is getting tacked onto the top, is acceptance. Maybe your very best friend here. When you accept that you can't do it all, rather than ongoingly convincing yourself that you can, the idea that you can is probably your greatest enemy and causes the greatest frustration and leads to the inability to tolerate things when they're not right. But when you accept that there is actually a limited number of hours in the day, you only have a limited capacity, limited energy, limited focus, and limited resources, just that acknowledgement may very well be the thing that clicks in your brain that makes you go, okay, since I can't do it all, now I need to be a little bit strategic about what I'm going to prioritize. Which brings us to the second idea, which was our first idea that's now our second idea.
But it's no less important. A few years ago, as we all went through the pandemic and the struggle and challenge that was, we, for the most part, have recognized the immense gift that it gave us in helping us to recognize what the priorities were in our lives and the things that were most important to create, in many cases, happier families.
We're never going to go back to how busy we were before the pandemic. We're going to use this pandemic as a learning tool, said everybody. And then as soon as the restrictions were lifted, we all went back to our crazy lives. It feels like they've only gotten busier. So be intentional.
That next step is about recognizing what our priorities are. Because until we recognize that, we are actually stuck. And then on top of that, recognizing that every decision we make is a choice.
Right.
Nobody's got a gun to our head telling us we have to do X, Y, and Z. We're the ones who determine how full the washing machine gets.
Just quickly on that, one of my favorite object lessons comes from a guy called Stephen Covey. We don't have time to pop this into the podcast, but can I recommend you jump onto YouTube and just type in Covey, C-O-V-E-Y, Covey Big Rocks. It's a 4-minute YouTube clip where Stephen Covey is standing in front of an audience of probably very highly paid executives at a big training session, and he's got a bucket full of all these tiny little green rocks. It fills 3/4 of this bucket, and then a handful of big rocks. The big rocks have labels on them like family relationships and work priorities and sleep and just all the stuff that really, really, really matters the most. The stuff that should be right at the very pinnacle of our priority list. But
the green rocks is the list that I just gave you.
Yeah, all the stuff.
Things.
And he asks this lady to get those big rocks into the bucket without going over the top of the bucket with all the green rocks already in there. And she just can't do it. It's not until she starts fresh and puts all of the big rocks in first that then she's able to tip all the other stuff in around it. And in this particular one, she gets it all in. But the reality is I don't think that you can, not in real life. And that's kind of the point. So clarity in priorities, I think, is our critical first idea. What is it that matters most? This requires us to do some heavy lifting in our brains. It requires us to try and get priorities and structures and routines right, because it will help us to get more done. Oh, Craig Bruce, our executive producer, sent through a quote that I think is perfect here from poet and author Anne Dillard, who said, "How we spend our days is, of course, how we spend our lives. What we do with this hour and that one is what we are doing. A schedule defends from chaos and whim. It is a net for catching days." Priorities, schedules, makes a difference. What's our second thing, which is kind of our third, but our second thing?
You've lost count.
I have, yeah, no.
Number 3 is, how can we outsource? What things can we outsource?
Yeah.
Is it that we organise for our groceries to be delivered instead of having to go to the shop and doing it all ourselves? That seems to be a really popular choice for a lot of families. Cleaning. Can we afford to have somebody come in and help with the cleaning? Or do we use the minions that we birthed?
I feel like I've got to do a Gru. We could laugh now. So I just want to highlight here on outsourcing, we recognise many, many, many people obviously doing it tougher now than we have in a long time because of the financial pressures that the economy has placed on so many families. But whether it's paying someone for cleaning or whether it's just helping out with carpooling and mixing up the routine with that kind of thing, like you said, getting some assistance with the shopping, being creative in the way that we can outsource can be a really useful way to create margin.
Number 4.
Yeah.
Learn to say no.
Big fan of this one.
You're a big fan of it.
Let me rephrase. Becoming a bigger fan of this one over time. When you know what you're saying yes to, it becomes easy to say no to other things.
Yeah.
So this is why knowing your priorities matters so much, because if you know that X, Y, or Z is your priority, that being at the kids' school assembly or watching them play sport on Saturday morning or being at home and focused rather than being on the phone or doing those emails, when you know what those things are, it's much easier to say yes to those, which makes it easy to say no to the other stuff that's going to intrude on that.
And lucky love?
I think that you've kind of touched on it already with the outsourcing idea, but I just want to highlight that another idea is to delegate stuff to the kids.
I was listening to a podcast recently and I loved the way they talked about this. This idea of assigning kids chores feels hard, and for most kids, they're going to buck, right? They don't want to be a part of it. But she used the word contribution. What part are you willing to contribute to the running of our house today? And I just loved it. It's literally a tiny shift in words, but it makes a significant difference in the way it's viewed.
Well, I've heard you use that word with our children just recently, and I also noticed that the children seemed to be willing to make a contribution when you phrased it and framed it that way. All these things can help to create margin. Will they guarantee to transform your life? Well, no. Well, sometimes, perhaps, maybe. We encourage you to try it. Get those big rocks in. Understand what the priorities are, except that you can't do it all. Get the minions involved. Say no when you can, and outsource. We really hope that these things create margin in your family and help to make your family happier. Happy Families podcast, as always, is produced by Justin Rulon from Bridge Media. Craig Bruce is our executive producer. For more information about making your family happier, we encourage you to visit us at happyfamilies.com.au or check out our Facebook page, Dr. Justin Coulson's Happy Families.